6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I think we have actually quite a good number of the participants that said that they would be joining us this morning. So I think we will begin. So colleagues, my name is Orla McDonough and I'm Dean of Arts and Humanities here in Dublin at Technological University Dublin. I'm also a board member of MusiQuE, and really delighted to be here this morning for this discussion about quality enhancement and how we are approaching it in different parts of our collective community. So I'd like to welcome you all here this morning. This is the third in 3 webinars that MusiQuE has been presenting. And we have 3 panelists this morning who will present for about 10 minutes each, following which we will have a question and answer session. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation. I always find that with our MusiQuE organization, that kind of co-learning experience is really something I come away always with new ideas and fresh ideas to move on with in our world. So just a number of things, I suppose, in the interim. We're not going to do a full introduction of everybody here this morning, but we have colleagues joining from all over Europe, which is really exciting. This is I suppose an unusual time, and our thoughts are with everybody at the moment, on our colleagues within the music community in the Ukraine. So I would like to just say that at the beginning, that we are thinking of them. I know many of us are making arrangements for students and faculty to be supported from the various music conservatoires and music institutions in the Ukraine at the moment. We will have just a couple of practicalities before we start, and then I'm going to go ahead and invite our first speaker to begin. So the first thing is I would ask that you please stay muted during the presentations, but please do leave your camera on. It's always nice to see who we're talking to rather than speaking into a dark internet in that sense. You can, of course, rename yourself if you need to, though, of course, many of us are very used to using Zoom. And the view can be changed. So you can click on view in the top right of the screen at any time if you want to change the view that you're looking at. We will have somebody monitoring the chat. So questions that occur to you during the presentations that you'd like to have addressed or like to discuss in the question and answer session at the end, you can post those in the chat during the presentations, and we will be looking at those. Our panelists will also be keeping an eye on those once they're finished presenting, obviously. So if there's a simple question that can be answered, we can take care of it even during the chat. But then at the end, we'll have the opportunity to discuss. So of course, we have a number of social media channels with MusiQuE. If you're not already connected to them, it would be wonderful if you would make sure that you connect to them so that we can make sure that the information that is out there that can be helpful to all of us is actually available to you. So I think Anna is displaying them there as I'm speaking. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very first member of the panel, who is Oliver Vettori. So Oliver is going to speak about the conflicting functions in internal quality assurance. Oliver is Dean of Accreditation and Quality Management at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And he'll be talking about a comparison between internal quality assurance and external quality assurance, as well as some practical elements and future challenges in the quality assurance and enhancement area. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Oliver.
Thank you so much, Ole. Good morning, everyone. If I take a look at the opening slide, I'll be the disappointment of the day. So you were saying it's about experiences from higher education music institutions. I don't come from that kind of institution, so that it can only improve from here. And it's about balancing IQA and EQA. And I'm going to talk very little about the balancing act between IQA and EQA. It's more about the balancing within IQA. But maybe it's still a good starting point to get there. And just for you, bear in mind that, yeah, sometimes our disciplinary backgrounds very much influence what we're doing. I've been fascinated by the work MusiQuE is doing in the last couple of years. But my own background is in organization theory. My university is focused on economics and business, so that might influence some of the views and some of the things I'm sharing. And I think it's always good to keep that out front. I'll just share my screen if I find what I wanted to share with you. Yes, there it is. I hope it works. Orla, can you give me an indication if you can see it?
Yes, we can indeed. And maybe, yeah, you're moving to the slideshow mode. Fantastic.
Very good, excellent. So the title I've chosen for today is the Swiss Army Knife Challenge. And again, that's nothing that you usually have to face in a music institution. But I think as a picture, in a way, even as a metaphor, it guides into what I want to share with you in this brief input. We all know what an army knife looks like, the typical classic Swiss army knife. We've all been given some of those as a present or bought them as presents or been fascinated by them. And this is what it typically looks like. You all know that there's so many different variants out there. Yeah? But usually you have some knife applied, you have scissors, something to open a bottle to open, yeah, a bottle of beer, a bottle of wine, whatever it would be. So all those things that come in handy if you only have one combined tool that you want to take with. And when I was Googling for Swiss army knife pictures, I also found that one, which shows you that that's the more modern version. Yeah, that's what you, as an organization or as an individual, you might need today. You need your Facebook and Twitter accounts. I mean, this is what comes in handy. So even you have kind of virtual Swiss army knives, arguably in your reservoir. Okay, now the big question, of course, is what has that to do with quality assurance? And my point would be most of our IQA systems are not that different because we're calling them an IQA system and we have this quiver of methods and they're actually very much like the classic ones. So most of us recognize the tools that are in that in that Swiss Army knife. Yeah? So all kinds of evaluations and surveys. So on the course level, student surveys, graduate surveys, program level reviews, quality handbooks that define all the standards and the processes, staff development processes, which for some reasons always appear in the toolkit of quality assurance, self-assessment reports, because that's what many of us are constantly writing and doing, evaluating ourselves, and then EQA takes over. And yeah, this less a tool than more a philosophy, all those PDCA cycles that we keep stumbling upon. So my first point would arguably be that we're building our IQA systems like the Swiss Army knife. One system, many functions, many different tools, and that's how it's supposed to work. And one of my key arguments for today is, but it doesn't work that way. And if we just take a look at the tools, we're not able to see that. So I want to take a step back with you and take a look at the context, because I see two problems with that kind of approach. One of them is problem A, the Swiss Army knife is not suitable for all contexts. Yeah, I've just chosen 4 pictures, but if you imagine yourself in those pictures, you couldn't do a lot with your Swiss Army knives. Yeah, what would you do in the middle of the ocean? Unless yours has some kind of beacon function or a life vest attached, but usually that's not the case. You couldn't do anything with them on the moon, not sitting on this very nice tree here in the middle of the southeastern jungle. You couldn't do anything there in the middle of the desert. So it's not suitable for all the contexts. But we are living in a world where we have very different contexts as higher education institutions. So these are just some context factors that I've assembled, yeah, and they're not related to the pictures, but it's just from the way. Music institutions are very specialized higher education institutions. And whenever I'm involved in any of their activities, you have a particular culture, you have the particular disciplinary focus. There's multidisciplinary HMEIs, there's different disciplines. And why should they be able to work all with the same Swiss Army knife? That won't work that well. There's a big difference. Yeah, I've been doing reviews, quality reviews all over the world for 20 different agencies, public and private HMEIs. They have big difference. I'm not even talking about the national legislation and everything, but in terms of their logic, there's a big difference there as well. There's a big difference between bigger and smaller HMEIs. Most music institutions, higher education music institutions, are rather small. A lot of other higher education institutions are rather big. yeah, how does that factor into it? And why should the same kind of IQA approach work with all of them? And last but not least, you have those with a more international outlook and those with a more local outlook. Now, of course, today we're all supposed to be international and global, but there is still a difference to what kind of audience you're catering to and where you get your most important student intake from. And again, that makes a big difference. Yeah, if you aim for international students, then you need to advertise all over the world. You need certain accreditation seals or ranking positions just for students to find them, to find you. So this makes a difference there. Point A, there's a problem if we take the context into account. Problem B, the Swiss Army knife is not suitable for all the purposes. Again, just four pictures. This rusty lock. You could try with a Swiss Army knife. If you're a real expert in handling it, you might get into the door. I couldn't. So what is implicitly also stated is it might depend on who's handling the knife, but here you couldn't do a lot with them. You couldn't drive this car with the help of a Swiss Army knife. Now, again, I'm pretty sure there's some people in the world who could. Most people couldn't. You see the workshop at the bottom right. Yeah, again, the knife won't help you a lot with that. And cooking, which I find is a very much underestimated art. Again, I mean, the only thing you could do is slice the tomatoes, but that's about it. For all the rest, you need something else. So again, there is problems attached to that logic. If we want, and now we come into the discourse, and now we come into political expectations, stakeholder expectations, a lot of the functions that we usually implicitly connect to quality assurance. Achieving better ranking positions, making ourselves better known, raising stakeholder satisfaction, meeting accreditation standards, externally imposed standards, or even raising an organization's effectiveness and efficiency. With the Swiss Army knife I was showing to you, with the tools that we usually have in our Swiss Army knife of IQA, we would be hard pressed to do that. But still, there are those expectations, and that's also one of the points I wanted to raise. There is this very strong focus on procedures, on instruments, on a tool that helps. But most of the expectations related to quality assurance will be very, very difficult to actually be aligned with that. And in a way, and that stems back to some research I did ages ago, but I still like to point that out. In a way, for me, it has to do with very different logics. And this is just one way of different logics we find in quality assurance. I'm not going to bother you a lot with theory and very abstract concepts, but the way I see it and the way we can see it in a lot of data is there is a big difference between a quality management approach, where it's about institutional effectiveness, where it's about achieving your strategic goals, and where it's about quality assurance, which is more like a political concept. That's also how it came about in the Bologna process. From a management perspective, in a management discourse, the roots of that are very much in business, total quality management. That's also where originally a lot of the quality assurance and quality management movements came about. They came from other sectors. It's oriented at the strategic goals. Instruments that are typical for that are goal agreements, key performance indicators, information systems that help, reporting that helps the management to get to it. And I'll come there in a moment. These are all things that on first sight we say, well, some institutions work better with them than others, but they're not that unfamiliar for us. And then there's the quality assurance, the political logic, with roots, as I said, in the political process, for example, in the Bologna Declaration, in how the European higher education area is supposed to work. This is less oriented at the strategic goals of an institution. This is more oriented at stakeholder expectations, at stakeholder satisfaction. If you take a look at the European standards and guidelines, which I would argue is the core concept driving that, this is a lot. I mean, they came together as a stakeholder-driven construct. And they're very much about listening and catering to stakeholder needs. Now, that's different than trying to ensure institutional effectiveness and efficiency, unless your main purpose is to make all kinds of stakeholders happy. Typical instruments for that are surveys, course evaluations, everything where we where we dig into and try to find what the stakeholders think, how they feel, how they're happy. I don't want to be diminutive of that. I think that's, and not of the other logic as well. My point here is to say, they are very different and going into different directions and requiring different approaches, but And this might be one of the points where I point out the discrepancies with EQA. But when it comes to external quality assurance, both of those logics are, without any reflection, completely mixed up. Yeah, I have globally, I have never seen an audit, accreditation, or evaluation scheme that has not at least traces of both logics in them. Yeah, so you find both, and that's very difficult if it's essentially about different purposes. And then in the external checkup, they come mixed together. That can't be ideal, and that means we have to reach a lot of compromise. So at the root of that, and I don't want to bore anyone, but I have to go very much back, and I know that this is something that everyone in quality assurance has been hearing for ages. But at the root of the problem still lies the question, what is quality? And here I can be a bit quicker because you're all that familiar with the problem. If we take quality, as I've just done, as an empty canvas, and you know that this is currently a very much accepted metaphor. So quality is something relative and context sensitive. This is something that we're familiar with. If you take a look at literature and data about all the different framings of quality, you see all the things that you're already familiar with, as customer satisfaction, as a competitive advantage, quality as excellence, quality as a success factor, as perfection, fitness for purpose, transformation, a goal to strive for, the fulfillment of externally imposed criteria, so essentially compliance, efficiency, something that is great because no one is against it in the first place. This is just a selection of things that you find in various quality policies, that you find in various scholarly articles. Now, why do I say that lies at the root? Why is it important? I'm just taking a couple of them. If we follow the idea of quality as stakeholder satisfaction or value for money or whatever an iteration of that would be, then arguably, if that's the goal, if that's the understanding, then arguably what you need to do is raise the satisfaction of your stakeholders. So it's mostly about stakeholder relationship management, stakeholder satisfaction surveys, improving students' experience, learners' experience in the organization, depending on what type of learners you have. If this is what it is about, making sure that they have the feeling they get what they're paying for, that they're happy about their experience, then you need a specific focus in your quality assurance system. If it is mostly, and there's a lot of countries out there and a lot of institutions that have to deal with that on a massive scale, if it's mostly about meeting external requirements, because you have national requirements, you have supranational requirements for a specific disciplinary field, then what you need is to make sure that you meet them. You need a management information system that helps you to be efficient and effective with keeping in line with all the data you need to feed into those constituencies. Self-assessment, you need to update and improve your process of self-assessment. It's about optimizing your fit with those standards. That's a different kind of muscle, that's a different kind of orientation. If it's about institutional effectiveness, more in a management logic, okay, then the focus is on key performance indicators. It's on process management. You want to design processes that lead to this effectiveness. You constantly need to evaluate your processes, build them up new, and it's about supporting the institution in achieving its strategic goals. You can't do that with, I have never found a single survey with which you could do that. Yeah. If it's about, as many of us would see, quality about better teaching and better learning experience, all right. But then again, the evaluation as such will not help you to do that. So what you need is a teaching and learning strategy and a policy that helps you get there. It's about the design of the academic program, of the curriculum, of the learning experience. It's about course design. It's about didactic trainings, helping people to get there. It's about supporting students and staff to develop their skills with regard to a satisfying teaching and learning experience. Now, these slides I've shared before, and I usually come to a point, if I take that more interactive, where immediately the question comes, well, yes, we want all of that. These are all goals that we want to, That's a problem of our institutions, that very often we want everything. And our governments want everything. And the question is, can we have it all? And my answer is always the same, maybe, but not with the exact same system and instruments, not with limited resources. You can basically build multiple systems at the same time and employ a lot of different instruments if you have the capacity for that. and not within the traditional quality assurance logic, because as I've tried to show is sometimes that's clashing. So there is bound to be a bit of disappointment when it comes to these goal conflicts. So, and this is the last idea I just wanted to share. And this has all been now very much analytical in terms of looking back. But what is kind of occupying my mind more and more, also from a strategic point of view, as already introduced me, I'm responsible for international for accreditation and quality management, but my actually bigger job is I'm responsible for all academic programs and teaching and learning and our international collaborations there. And there is a lot of things that are more future oriented, so this is the last idea that I wanted to share with you, that when building those IQA systems, then one of the things we need to ensure is that they are actually linked to the future challenges that we're dealing with as institutions. And that's far from all the analytical problems I wanted to point out. That's something that's still a bit nut to crack. So I've just chosen five challenges as I see them from my institution that we currently have to deal with. One of them is the whole issue of demographic change. You see that in the upper left corner. But I also like the picture because it changes the way we think about things. These are two people, each of them teaching each other and learning from each other. Yeah. One of them is the one who's much more versatile with the computer. The other one can give her experience. And so even the way we teach is something that we have to reconsider. Yeah? Currently, we're considering ideas of mentoring and reverse mentoring. So more experienced people teaching the younger ones, but the other ones also mentoring them in the things where they know more. For this, we need different kinds of mechanisms and different kind of quality assurance mechanisms. The second picture I can be a bit more quickly about, because we are all that much now familiar with the discourse on sustainability, sustainable development goals. But again, if it's about our environmental footprint as institutions and how we can contribute to making the world a better place, how is quality assurance contributing to that? The whole digital transformation process. Yeah, in most cases, even our QA is not able yet to deal with a concept that has been very old, like e-learning. But now the whole issue of a society transformed by digitalization. Again, how can we contribute with that for quality assurance? And two aspects that are very dear to me, the puzzle picture at the lower left corner, for me symbolizes the increasingly fragmented knowledge base on which we're sitting. I mean, there's so much research and progress being made, but there's more and more specialization. We've seen it in fighting the COVID pandemic, how you could bring together or needed to bring together people with different disciplinary backgrounds in order to work it out. And even they couldn't agree on everything. And I think that's pretty clear. How do you ensure that we're not creating just those specialists, but people who are able to talk to each other? Also in societies that are increasingly torn. And again, what is QA? What is higher education? But ultimately, what is quality assurance contributing to that? Because if these are institutional goals, again, a stakeholder satisfaction survey might not be the most suitable tool. And the same, I think, is valid when it comes to internationalization. So knowing fully well that you're from University of Arts, but not from the building arts or designing arts, so ending with this picture, maybe an alternative to the Swiss Army knife would be to build our quality assurance systems more like a paint box, where it's less about a fixed tool for one purpose, and you can even use it for another purpose as well, but the knife will work best for slicing something. Yeah, you can stab someone, arguably, but there's a lot of things you can't do with that. With the colors, you can have very much different shades and those things. And leaving that for your fantasy, how that could be built, but I'd be also very happy also after today's webinar to step in a contact with you and discuss a bit about our ideas and how we're building our QA system to make it more function like a water box. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you for those fabulous pictures with which to start our morning. A very creative way, I think, of getting us all to think about the different pieces of this jigsaw in terms of quality. And I'm really struck by just that evaluation, I suppose, of what is the true purpose of a particular quality process, and thinking about the context, and then that difference between the more perhaps traditional, maybe boxed type of quality process and quality management versus something like that paint box, which is a bit more flexible, a bit bespoke for the situation while still looking after quality. So thank you very much for that. A very interesting way to start our webinar this morning. So we will move on to our second presenter this morning, who is Janneke Ravenhorst. And Janneke is head of the Quality Culture Office at the Royal Conservatory at The Hague. So Janneke is going to talk a little bit about how our quality culture has been constructed on internal and external quality assurance at her institution in The Hague. So Janneke, please take the floor.
Thank you, Orla, for this nice introduction. And I feel honored to tell you something about the quality culture approach at the Royal Conservatory in The Hague. And let me just start by showing you a little preview of our own Swiss Army knife, our very own approach towards quality culture at the Conservatory. We call it the lemniscate of continuous improvement. And we try with this lemniscate to connect the traditional and the often mandatory compliance tools with instruments that can help us to actually enhance the quality of our education and work towards an overall quality culture. So I would very much like to share more about the specifics of our approach, but unfortunately there's not enough time. So let me just show you what it looks like and how we visualize our approach for our students and our staff. And hopefully you can see at a glance that the connection that we make between the internal feedback cycle, which is here, and the external one. And if you look at the small dots moving, you can also see that this feedback has an effect on both of these cycles. So it goes around, but it also goes into the other cycle. And if you click through, you can see the instruments that we use. And one of these being the critical friend, about which I will tell you more in just a minute. So now back to the more boring PowerPoint presentation I have for you. Here we go. And here we are. So with this lemniscate of continuous improvements, our quality culture approach at the Conservatoire, our aim is to link artistic standards with educational quality. Higher arts education has been traditionally strongly concentrated on artistic standards or artistic quality, as can be seen in the existing tradition of examinations and final presentations in the form of public concerts, installations, and exhibitions. Artistic standards take the lead in teaching as well, with ongoing evaluation and improvement being a natural part of the lessons. With educational quality, we mean the quality of educational aspects, such as the organization and the coherence of the curriculum, how exams are organized, or whether students have adequate opportunities to receive or to give feedback. And with this approach, we try to better connect these standards. And we probably all had experiences with informal feedback in the hallway, between lessons, at the coffee machine. And as important as those moments are, it is important also to create formal feedback opportunities as well. Then, having said that, it is also important to gather quantitative information and to have some information on the average opinion of a specific population, and to know if there are specific deviations or trends that can tell us something about the effect of specific improvement actions. In the music field, the professional field is an international one. So wherever we can, we want to make use of international perspectives, where we can create the opportunity to benchmark ourselves against similar institutions. We want to increase ownership and relevance for students and teachers. And as you can see in the lemniscate that I just showed you, we make an effort connecting internal and external perceptions of quality. For instance, by using feedback from the professional field as topics in student panels, but also to use the minutes of those student panels as input for critical friends when they are preparing for their visit. Finally, we want to better connect internal and external QA. Or as you could say, to better connect compliance with enhancement. Although a lot can be said about all these objectives, today I will focus on this connection, the connection between external and internal quality assurance. External compliance is, of course, very important. We want to prove to others that our educational programs are compliant with national and international standards. External QA, in that sense, is indispensable. Only by meeting shared standards, we can prove that the quality of our educational programs is comparable to those at other institutions. However, a problem that often occurs when proving compliance is that the focus on enhancement is diminished. By taking the risk focusing on weaknesses and improvement areas during an external accreditation process, if this could lead to a compliance problem. And this is a waste because, after all, effective internal QA is a condition for being successful in external QA. So today I would like to go into an example of how we make this connection in practice. And one of the tools we use to make this connection are our critical friends. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with critical friend reviews, let me shortly describe how this works for us. Critical friends are recognized experts in the discipline of the department concerned. Critical friends visit the Conservatory to conduct a review of a specific department and then write a report with its findings and recommendations for improvement. Every year, several departments within the same study program, such as our vocal department, our jazz or our classical department, are being reviewed by a critical friend who is an external expert, considered to be an international authority with regard to the content of the courses offered by the department. The critical friend visits the department for approximately 3 days. This visit is underpinned by the results of various surveys, including curriculum evaluations or student panel reports. And during this visit, the critical friend will speak with management, teachers, student and non-academic staff, people like me, quality assurance officers. And these critical friends then can have individual talks or talks in small groups, visit classes, performances, examinations, but also sample written work and study relevant materials in order to get an impression of the quality of the program in terms of artistic standards and in terms of educational quality. And after such a visit, the critical friend will convey his or her findings in a report, including a set of concrete recommendations. And then we ask the management of the department to relate to this report, to discuss it both with students and with teachers, and to create a reaction to this report, an improvement plan based on those recommendations. After 3 years, the critical friend pays the department a return visit so that developments can be monitored. In this way, the Conservatoire endeavors to make quality assurance less bureaucratic and instead focus more on a dialogue about the quality of the education. And although critical friends are using the MusiQuE standards, which are based upon the European standards and guidelines, and their visits are primarily focused on quality enhancement, whereas the regular review visits can be more focused on the assessment of formal standards and requirements. In other words, compliance. All of these critical friend reports and the resulting improvement plans are then input for the self-evaluation report when it is time for an actual review of the entire study program, or so to say, external QA. So there you have it. This is an example of how we try to better connect internal and external QA. We have found in recent years that this approach appeals greatly to students and teachers and has generated greater engagement with and a sense of ownership in quality processes. We have found that the more experience we have gained with this form of department-specific review, the greater the enthusiasm has been for the critical friend approach in its Conservatoire's community. With these critical friends, departments have ample opportunity and space for internal QA, for critical reflection, and for finding opportunity for enhancement. A review team in a classic review or external QA can then use those critical friend reports as input to assess the quality and the focus on enhancement of the program. They can even talk to some of the critical friends, which we organized during a recent accreditation process of 2 of our master programs. So, to summarize, here we are. As I already mentioned, the critical friend approach is strongly focused on quality enhancement because of qualified recommendations. It focuses more on greater engagement of students and teachers. Visit by Critical Friends have created a new dynamic of students and teachers being far more aware of their own influence on the quality of their education. And it takes both aspects of the concept of quality into account. It speaks the language of students and teachers. It creates an international benchmark and the opportunity to learn from best practices elsewhere. And it balances internal and external QA and has more focus on the specific characteristics on the field of music. And then finally, and very importantly, it stimulates a positive and vibrant dynamic within the institution and an increased level of ownership both for students and teachers. In this way, the approach helps us to connect internal and external QA and to actually enhance the quality of our programs and works towards an overall quality culture. This brings my contribution to an end. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Janneke. And it's fascinating to think about particularly that impact on the academic staff and students in the institution, that enhancement piece about the involvement with Critical Friends, how that has a ripple effect in terms of people's understanding of really the true purpose of what we're all trying to do, particularly if they're not in roles that are directly involved with reviews and quality enhancement more on a more full-time basis. Thank you very much for that. So colleagues, we will move to our final presentation of this morning, and I'd like to welcome Brian Weir, who's Director of Student Experience at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama in Cardiff. And Brian is going to talk about how quality assurance is embedded in the strategic development in his institution. So Brian, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orla, and good morning, or maybe nearly good afternoon to some of you. Everyone, thanks very much for the invite to join today and to talk. Actually, what I'm going to do is just talk and use this as an opportunity I've made to reflect with colleagues who are experts in this field around the experience that I've just had in leading a full institutional review at the Royal Welsh College by MusiQuE, which we did back in November, and I'm waiting with bated breath for the outcome of my report, which is due, I was told by Blage, towards the end of this month. So I can't tell you how we've done yet, but I can tell you how it felt in going through that process. Just by way of a bit of a background, and I think it's important just to set the context with regards to what the Royal Welsh College is. So the college is the National Conservatory of Wales. It's the only conservatoire in Wales, and it teaches both music and drama. So that immediately was a bit of an addition for MusiQuE with regards to the fact that we were an institution that was also teaching drama students. We're relatively young. We're only 75 years old. So it's in a conservatoire in the UK sector. We're fairly young. We support 850 students annually from across the world and treat them as young professionals from the moment that they arrive at the college, both through placing them in the local community, but also through public engagement, of course. We also have a junior conservatoire that teaches around 200 under 18-year-old students on a Saturday, and also a young actors studio, which teaches drama students between the ages of 7 and 18 on a Sunday. So again, an additional dynamic for MusiQuE with regards to an institutional review, where we also wanted to include our junior departments in that process. We operate as a thriving arts centre, so we're the busiest arts centre in Wales, 55,000 audience members per year, over 500 events per annum in our venues, and offering events around musical theatre, concerts and opera to newly commissioned plays, puppetry, drama performances, etc., exhibitions, etc. So all the things that you would expect. However, and from a sort of context point of view about this conversation, where our governance model is unique. We're a charity in our own rights, but we're also a limited company that's owned by a larger university. We're part of the University of South Wales group. The University of South Wales is one of the biggest universities in Wales. And so quality assurance and enhancement has for a number of years been a nice to have for us, rather than something we've had to do on our own right. We haven't had to have institutional inspections from the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK in our own right. We form part of the review visits that take place as the university's partner, but not standing on our own 2 feet. So that was all fairly straightforward within a well-established framework and a large university. So you may already be questioning, as I still do daily, why we decided to put ourselves through an institutional review with MusiQuE when actually we didn't really have a need to do that. And the reason was that, and many of you will know this person, the reason was that in 2018, Helena Gaunt was appointed principal of the college, and she's been for a number of years extremely active in the AEC and music. And she obviously brought renewed vision and energy and ambition about the college and the future strategic direction of the college. There was a restructured senior management team that was put into place, which included 4 new appointments across both academic and professional services. And that renewed leadership set a major objective in trying to achieve greater clarity and accountability for us in relation to our own governance, and a stronger responsibility for quality assurance and enhancement through the college within a maturing relationship with that university that we were part of. Ultimately and strategically, this was setting the direction for the medium term, where the college has status desires to go for its own taught degree awarding powers and evaluate full autonomy in the fullness of time through strategic development. So it was a moment for us to evidence that we were an institution that could have confidence in our processes in our own right, and also a maturity as an institution. So we prepared for an institutional review that would give us that ability to demonstrate that. And I just want to reflect with you a couple of ways in which we tried to do that internally, and then also how we tried to match it to external expectation as well. So the first thing I did as part of preparing for the institutional review was we formed what was called a program leaders group. Now, actually, that ended up being 18 fairly senior academic members of staff across the institution, course leader level or head of department level, who we brought together with student representation, chaired by the principal. And that group's work also benefits from external expertise and critical friending, which I'll come back to in a second. And what we did was we took the domains of a music review and broke them down into working groups within that team of 18 people. So we assigned someone as a lead for each of the domains. So, for example, Helena herself took on strategic direction, and I took on the domain around quality enhancement and insurance. And then we got 3 or 4 people to work with those leads to SWOT analyze where we were inside each of those domains. So what were the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are available from where we were at the moment, what we were looking to try to achieve, and what we thought our next moves might be to reach the standards that we were trying to get to. And then those working groups came back to that larger group of people, and we discussed, teased out, identified, and cross-referenced whether everyone around the table agreed with where the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats were. Those SWOT analyses formed the basis for the document itself, and I'll come back to the document itself in a moment. The second thing we did externally was that we then asked Music if they would liaise with the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK. So we asked Music to be in contact with the QAA. Now, whilst we didn't have a need or requirement to meet the QAA standards, we wanted them to be assured of our own processes. And so Music and the QAA started discussing about how Music's standards may be able to benchmark against the QAA standards. And we put a spreadsheet together which was able to evidence for the QAA that a satisfactory music review for the Royal Welsh College would hold the college in good stead with the QAA for a period of years, even though the college itself didn't have to go through that process at this point. Now, the real strategic benefit for us with regards to that was if we got to a point where we were realising our ambition around taught degree awarding powers and autonomy in our own right, the QAA in the UK were confirming that we wouldn't need to do an institutional review in order to meet their standards. They would take the music review as that already having been achieved. So it became quite a risky thing to do, and it wasn't without risk in going through this process. But that was a really worthwhile thing to put in place. I think the program leaders group for me internally achieved a number of things. First of all, I should say that my background is as an administrator. I've 25 years experience as an administrator, but I'm not a QA or a QE expert. I can put a process in place, I can put a structure in place, but actually what I needed was the people who were the experts sitting around me. And by bringing that program leaders group together, what we actually did was widen ownership and accountability, and that sense of a moment to celebrate where we were across a much wider group of people. It gave us an opportunity to celebrate our unique selling points and everything that we were doing, a moment to actually talk about why we felt as if we could have confidence in what we were doing, but also a moment to reflect on what we thought the next steps in our development should be, and to set those out in a document that was honest and open, but also was saying we are on a journey to further strategic ambition. It wasn't an opportunity. I did not present it as an opportunity for us to be tested or to be asked to justify where we were in our progress. And in that sense, MusiQuE was a brilliant framework in order to be able to do that. And you will all recognize that having peers from institutions like us it means that you don't have to contextualize where you are in the process or explain problems that are already shared within our sector. And it was also a moment actually to celebrate being part of that bigger university. So a moment of externality again with saying to them, we want you to have confidence in us too. Yes, we operate within your framework, but we want you to celebrate and be aware of the confidence and maturity that we have in ourselves. Critical friending was really important part of this in all of this process for us, and we benchmarked across a number of different sectors with regards to music and drama, of course, and also as a whole institutional review, we also had to make sure the junior provision was included in all of that, and so we had a critical friend who worked with us through the whole process, tested the document, prepared the staff for the visit that was coming, dug deep into the documentation that we were providing and producing to sample some questions about what a panel might come and ask about when they got to come and visit with us. The document itself, whilst we had a program leaders group that was formulating the content for that document, when it came to the point of writing it, that responsibility fell back on myself. And that was because we didn't want to have a document that was written by committee. Almost impossible to do that. So what we did was critical friend the document across the program leaders group, but actually it had a single voice throughout it, which was my voice. We produced it as a PDF with hyperlinks and also OneDrive links. So the mountains of evidence that we had to gather with regards to a whole institutional review was then held centrally, but within an interactive document that the panel could click from to go directly to those links. It took me 3 months to write it. I thought it was going to take me about a week. I've always been a bit like that, I'll get the evidence, I'll get the information, and then I'll be ready and I'll just do it. Actually, when it came to it, it took 3 months. It didn't take me all day every day for 3 months. It probably took me a day a week for 3 months. But actually that kind of making sure that we got a document that we could stand proud next to involved quite a lot of stakeholder engagement and a lot of conversation around people feeling as if they could have confidence in the document. And just back to that point about self-reflection, the document itself at the end of each domain had a moment where we self-reflected on what we'd learned from that domain's theme as part of this process. And I'll give you an example of that. So domain 1, which is around strategic direction of the institution. These were not big moments. These were not moments of confessing all sins, but they were moments where we said, having done this work, here's where we think our next step is. And actually what we were trying to do was tease out where the panel might assist us in critical friending externally as a panel when they came to work through the process with us. So the reflection about strategic direction says, we recognize opportunities exist to engage students more deeply in the vision as makers in society, bringing craft discipline into dialogue with societal responsibility and diverse ways in which this may be expressed, and sharpening understanding of the power and impact of the arts in order to advocate for the disciplines. This has formed part of our consideration in developing our academic strategy, which includes Welsh language commitments to reflect an institution proud of its position as in a bilingual nation. So what that movement was doing was saying, in doing this work, we recognise we have much more to do with regards to ambition around makers in society for our students today and of the future. So in that moment of self-reflection, what did I learn from this whole process? I think picking up on some of the points that the other two speakers have already talked about, I think for me, there was something came out of this about assurance being something that flows down and enhancement being something that flows up. So and I think our process itself demonstrated this. So the ideas about enhancement and development came from flow up of conversation through our committee structure, but from the program leaders group, for example, in particular. Whereas the framework to assure ourselves of that was being led from the top, either by a university or by the music framework or by the QAA standards. But actually the thing we were trying to achieve was top down, and the ways in which we were opening the dialogue to achieve that was about bottom up. And I think that gave an awful lot of confidence and empowerment to those staff who were part of that process, and it helped us to frame conversation around opportunities to grow rather than to justify an assurance or meet a standard that was already in place. It was about us in dialogue with those external assurance providers. As I said, I'm an administrator, so I provided that framework, I provided that opportunity. But actually, when I married that with the academic experts who were passionate about that enhancement of their subject and in the quality assurance and enhancement of the institution, actually it became something that was really exciting and extremely rewarding. And so when I think back to why do we want to do a MusiQuE review, on reflection, actually it was absolutely the right thing for us to do. I'll just leave you with a little anecdote. Well, someone quite senior, who I've mentioned earlier at the college, said to me just after she arrived, quality assurance is a bit like brushing your teeth. It's just good hygiene. It's something you just need to do and do well. Now it's much more than that, and I've become a bit passionate about quality assurance, and I never thought I would, but here I am talking about it. And it is a bit like brushing your teeth, but I'd go a bit further and say, actually, when you brush your teeth really well and in front of other people, then actually it can feel extremely refreshing and clean at the end. And so I leave you with the fact that I feel as if I have once again this morning brushed my teeth in public. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for that. And a fascinating kind of overview of a very recent experience, really. And what I'm struck by, apart from the fact that I actually wrote this down, you said that this experience was really exciting and rewarding, which is not something you often hear people say just after a major review process. So I'm really delighted to hear that was the experience. But I think for the impact that I was hearing as a thread throughout what you were talking about, the impact on the institution, the ownership and engagement that spread outwards, and that enhancement piece then kind of bubbling up from, as you say, from bottom to top, which is a very different experience than perhaps some other former, I think, interpretations of the old kind of checkbox quality assurance piece. And that's really that interesting relationship about, where all of this hopefully is changing for the better. So really great to hear about all of that. So colleagues, I want to thank our three presenters and open the floor to some questions and answers. I can see that Jack and Oliver were having a little conversation. One question in the chat, which has already been answered, but happy to take questions from the floor for any and all of our colleagues, if there's any particular burning ones this time. And if not for the moment, I might just ask one to get us started on all of this. And I suppose in all three of the presentations this morning, it was interesting to hear about the diversity of approaches really to this kind of term quality culture. So, I mean, Oliver obviously was talking about that difference between the Swiss Army knife and at the end, that whole paint box. Janneke was talking about that experience of working with critical friends over a long period of time and how that sort of changes the quality culture in her institution. And Brian, of course, has just spoken about that enhancement piece. In your own institutions, is or indeed in the other institutions where you've worked, is the term quality culture, rather than I suppose having to do a review at a particular period of time, maybe every 3 to 5 years, depending on program or institutional review, is that something that's pervasive? Is that something that our institutions generally are talking about, or is it still, do you feel, the realm of those of us that are very directly engaged with quality enhancement? I'm curious to see how far out that feels.
Ready for Stakeholder?
I can hear somebody.
Yeah, it's me, Oliver.
Oh, thank you, Oliver. Hi.
All right. Hey, it's good. Briefly on quality culture, because I have been doing so much work on that. I think we need to be a bit cautious with the term and the concept. There is so much inclination to use it as a tool or as a goal, But essentially, every organization has a culture. Every organization has a quality culture. So it's more the question, what kind of culture do we have? How are we currently dealing with that? Now, having that said, if I interpret your question correctly, it's more like, where are we leaning towards in the institution I'm currently working on? That's difficult to say because it's a big institution, but what I can share is we avoid terms like quality assurance or quality management altogether. The way we've built the system, that appears nowhere. This appears for the sake of the external evaluators and the external auditors. We're not using that. So we're using a language that our teachers are familiar with. So we usually talk about program management because the academic programs is what most of them are actually, and that's where we focus on. And all the quality standards attached to that. We can easily bring on board, but we don't even have to call them quality standards. So I'm not saying it's 100% working out, because sometimes you need words like quality, to make us to signal something. But altogether, we try to avoid that within within all our dealings, and we frame it very differently.
Yeah. And was there a particular moment perhaps that decision about that change of language, and a particular reason for doing it in that way?
Well, I think it was both a subconscious and a conscious decision. So part of it happened that started 10 to 15 years ago when we were building up the way we have organized our teaching and learning and building up the. And the other thing was, the more I was involved also with quality assurance as a discourse, I realized where the pitfalls are in that. And I've never been, also in reviews with other institutions in other countries, I've always been advocating, people, don't make all your faculty members know about external standards and all the quality. They don't need to speak the language of quality assurance. It's the QA professionals who need to. They need to translate that into the language and the life world of the people who do what they do. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Certainly, I think our profession, the music education profession has shifted very much in that direction, because I think initially perhaps there might have been a fear surrounding this whole process, even though ironically we're very used to exams, we're very used to this kind of evaluation in a black and white sense, but the idea of somebody looking at how we teach or having to discuss this or put it down in writing, I think, and years ago this was a challenging thing perhaps. But the needle seems to have shifted a little bit since. It's an interesting thing in my own institution. So we are, there's a conservatoire inside a much larger university. And the university has the typical kind of university external quality and internal quality cycles and procedures. But there is an openness and an understanding about that idea of shared international best practice. So you can have that conversation with the main university quality assurance office. Although when I go, remember, Brian, you were talking about there's a sense of, there's a bit of a risk in sometimes when we take a moment and we just decide to have a review when one is not necessary. The learning that you get out of that is just so important.
Orla, can I just add as well, sorry, and just completely endorse everything that Oliver's just described, and just add into that quite often, I've explained, I only became responsible for this area of work 4 years ago. I quite often revert back to how would I explain, or how do I talk to students about this? Because I can evidence and produce documents that say we are assured of our own quality. But actually, what does that mean for the students that we're teaching? And the more I remind myself that I'm trying to explain that to the people we're actually delivering the product to, the easier it is to explain the relevance, context, and importance to the staff who are then teaching them as well. Yeah. And Oliver's absolutely right. The vocabulary becomes about something that we can put in place at the end. Yeah. But the actual thing that's happening is the really important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Janneke, would you agree in terms of the same type of language piece around this, and how, let's say at the Hague, that is communicated with the students? You talked about both the students and the staff having that engagement with the critical friend process. So is it have you seen that language change, that sense of understanding amongst the students in the way that Brian is mentioning?
Well, yes, and I agree for a large part with the idea not to really go into the technicalities of assuring the quality within the educational programs, but there is a slightly different turn that we made a few years ago, and that is to explicitly talk about quality with the students and the teachers, to use that word quality. So not all the techniques and not all technicalities behind it, but the word quality, and to make students and teachers aware that they have a shared responsibility in that quality. And even if you look at students, we think that, helping them having a constructive discussion about the quality of their education is actually also preparing them for the profession, in a sense, because we want to deliver musicians that are also able to have a constructive dialogue about quality, if it is about education or about musicianship. I think it's a tool that they can use when they finish their studies, and the same goes for the teachers. So we explicitly use that word quality in everything that we do, and perhaps that's a little bit different, but I totally agree with the other speakers that when it comes to the technicalities, that we should leave that to the technical stuff behind it. Yeah.
Well, and I'm just even thinking of the conversations that maybe 3 panel members might have at a recital jury, and how that is changed when their understanding of the kind of quality enhancement piece and that language is there's a greater awareness around this. And even in terms of, as you say, the graduates who emerge from our institutions and how they present to themselves in terms of what they're trying to do, be it in a project or a recital series, just that sense of awareness about what this means and its practicalities. It's better for all, really. I think if there's that awareness among students and staff. I see that my colleague in Dublin, Mary Lennon, has her hand up. So I'm going to go to Mary first and then take some questions out of the chat. Mary, I think you might be muted. Are you muted still?
Thank you very much, Orla, and thank you very much, presenters. Really enjoyed that. I'm just coming in on the language piece first. I think it was really refreshing, the use of language in all of the presentations today. And the idea of quality culture, and thank you, Oliver, for coming in there to clarify that. That it's the concept that every organization has it. And I think one of the issues, now Orla may not agree with me, maybe speaking out of turn, but I think one of the issues that may be an issue for our institution is that perhaps the culture of the institution doesn't always match the culture of the wider university. I'm just putting that out there to be considered. And that I also think that the whole process of quality, it's something that's, like Janneke just said now, it's something, and like Helena Gaunt and washing the teeth, it's something that's happening all the time. And I think there is a perception that it's something that happens every 5 years or 6 years or 3 years or whatever, depending on the requirements of the institution. And I love that sense that we're all committed to quality. The other thing I took as being really important was, well, also that the idea of these review processes and critical friends, that it actually helps an institution become critically conscious of its own culture. I think we're not always conscious of it. And I loved the idea of the critical friends. I've known about that for a while. I think the thing that came out from Janneke and Brian as well was the ownership. And I think that's a huge issue, that it's something, whilst it's something that is going on all the time, that people are made conscious of it as that they are part of it, and that they are actually creating the culture and they are enhancing the whole process. Sorry, that's just a bit of a ramble, but the language I think is so important, and I really like the positive refreshingly positive approaches that have been presented today.
Thank you, Mary. And, you know, I think I would agree with you actually in terms of the culture of the Conservatory not necessarily matching the culture of the university. And it's an interesting thing. In our organization, there's a Conservatoire as a school within one of the largest universities in Ireland. And I'm struck a little bit by Brian's the description of what you said about the Royal Welsh in comparison to the University of South Wales. And so it's slightly different in that we're not our own institution separate from the university, but connected. And absolutely the delivery, that's one of the big challenges, in fact, that of being part of a larger institution when the type of delivery that happens within the Conservatoire is so different from the type of delivery that happens in a more traditional university context. And so that sort of conversation about language and almost the socialization of how we do what we do in a different way perhaps than might happen in large lecture halls, etc. That's a big piece, and it's definitely part of I think that ongoing awareness raising piece that different institutions have to do, whether it is with their local political situation or their kind of mothership university in a sense, or whether they stand alone, you know, in terms of dealing directly with their stakeholders. So very, very important point there. Other thoughts? I see Valerie. Valerie, come ahead.
Yes. Hello, my name is Valerie Smit. I'm a Quality Assurance Coordinator at Conservatorium, Belgium, Ghent. I recognize a lot of the topics that have been brought up as well. We ourselves are also faced with the situation we're a School of Arts, but we're also part of University College Ghent. And there we've had a bit of a shift where at the central level, they really went more to a very controlling approach, whereas we have like a more tailored approach towards the arts, and it's sometimes conflictuous. So we also work with external reviews, and that's, for us, it's very interesting also, since it's even like a program review is a bit of an institutional review of our School of Arts. We have institutional reviews, but they're just for the whole University College of Ghent. What we tend to do is to get more quality culture. We really try to be like partners. We're like in it together. And I find that's the best approach to do it, because it takes away a bit of the hostility and the big framework that is otherwise put upon the shoulders of the teachers. And we are just working together on it. We try to make it a learning process, and we really work tailored, see what works, what doesn't work. We have like a lot of instruments, but we really do it and work in dialogue. It's time investment. It's rather intense, but it's an approach that works for us. But it's not always easy. And what I also think is sometimes problematic is like ownership. Is especially for music, but also for our other education, is like small percentages that certain teachers have. They have artistic practices outside the school, they work in different schools, and that is sometimes hard to have those people also part of the culture, of the quality culture, or to feel involved. So we have like a group of people who are more involved, but we do not always reach everyone, and that I find problematic. I do not know if other institutions, how they deal with it, because I presume these small percentages are not unique for our school.
It's not just in Ghent. I see a lot of nodding heads and smiles on the pictures in front of me. Yeah, absolutely. That's if we take a step backwards and we're looking at that overall strategic piece of that quality enhancement rising, you know, within the institution, regardless of any review, you know, that's a really important piece, because certainly we can find ourselves in situations where we're relying on a dedicated few staff members who are always involved in this. And then how do you I suppose, bring in the others. I was really glad to hear of the approach that Brian described in the recent review of that team of 18, and then, you know, individual kind of areas and SWOT analyses and coming back together. So that those kinds of structures are very interesting in trying to broaden the conversation. Does anybody else have any success stories they could share from their own institutions about how you know, the engagement perhaps more broadly beyond the certain number of individuals who are involved with quality assurance has worked, that we could share with each other? I kind of remember a recent batch of music review that I have to put a lot of credit to Mary on, but there were, I think at one point, the wider group teaching on this program is about 68 in the Conservatory in Dublin, and so trying to manage a review process and engage, you know, and seek information from all of those individuals who all have artistic practices outside the institution. Very big challenge, of course. Yeah. Janneke, thank you. Come on in.
Well, perhaps there's something I can say about the experience that we have in The Hague, because one of the things that I've learned over the years is that everything stands and falls with your communication about what you're doing with the feedback that you are receiving. So the more you can make clear what you are doing with that, the more feedback you will get. Yes. And one of the things that we did to make that more visible is to introduce something that we call kliklijsten. It's a Dutch word, and it means that we have screens on the doors of the toilets in the building, where we communicate periodically what we did with the feedback in surveys from teachers and student panels, and what kind of enhancements came out of that. So when you go to the toilet in the conservatory, you can just read what we are doing with your feedback. So this is one thing that really helped more than I expected when we introduced it. And another thing that we do is that we explicitly look at feedback, specifically feedback in surveys, as something like a thermometer. So it can only indicate if there is perhaps a fever, but what the cause of the fever is, you will never get out of a survey. So we always connect those surveys to student panel meetings, where we talk with the students, with the people who gave the feedback in the surveys, about what was behind their responses, so that we can actually see what enhancements they are looking for, because, well, a percentage is not always a good direction of where to go to, where to improve. So those are two things that we do that I think help increase feedback from students and teachers, because they see that something is happening with it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing that I think very busy musicians, and in some cases actors, and other artists that we have in some of our institutions perhaps detest more than what they perceive as something that is a waste of their time. So when they see that feedback loop and exactly the changes, then they're more willing to contribute. I think we could all say that we have experienced something similar, but I really like that idea of the screens in the back of the toilet, because you can't delete those like people can delete emails just immediately without reading, you know. So that's wonderful. I'm just looking at Oliver had put something in the chat there, and I just wanted to kind of highlight, which was around a question about how his institution is currently changing their system to address this mismatch between, let's say, the Swiss Army knife and the paintbrush. And that sense of functional differentiation. So having different units which are serving those functions or goals. It's an interesting one. It strikes me to be a little similar to some of what Brian was talking about in terms of how they set up their group. And what strikes me is, you know, all of our institutions, or many of our institutions, will have a maybe a cycle of reviews that we must have. And I know certainly when I began working in higher education, my approach as a young professor, young lecturer was, okay, well, we must meet these review cycles. I didn't necessarily at that point in time think outside of, well, what is it that in fact we need to do. It was more about addressing what was expected of us in that sense. And what has happened since, I suppose, in my journey with quality enhancement particularly, is that I have shifted, and while those review cycles are part of that external piece, there's much more focus on what actually is the need for the institution itself, so which I think is a very, very important thing. And that kind of horizon to move from one side to the other is something that I've really enjoyed, and the results of this quality enhancement piece as a result are much more valuable, I think, to our institutions. So that particular journey is something that I think is quite interesting for us to consider. It goes back to that institutional culture question. Where are we? What is that culture? And how many of us are kind of meeting the requirements as opposed to generating that sort of organic quality conversation and quality enhancement piece. Brian, go ahead.
And absolutely, and just to add all of that, Orla, one of the real joys of the program leaders group that we established was that it's continuing, and so it was formed to prepare for the review, but actually it's a conversation that's carried on, and the fundamental reason of why it's carried on is because actually across the institution at that level, we weren't bringing the course leaders together regularly to have conversation. And what we discovered when we started doing that was that there were pockets of enhancements that were happening that actually other people started saying, that's a really good idea. That would work for us. Or we were starting to hear about pockets of enhancement in one course that the institution then said that would work across the curriculum. So let's take that and embed it further across the institution. Now, and going back to the point a minute ago, what that really did for those staff who otherwise hadn't previously been really interested or engaged in quality enhancement or assurance was that it affirmed for them as individuals their own practice and gave them something to celebrate. The institution was saying, that's a really good bit of work. We really appreciate that. Let's take that further. And so that kind of ownership and accountability of this area of work became something that other people started to be really excited about. And kind of, yes, they're doing the thing that we've done for years and it's a really good thing. So let's celebrate that. So, and entirely for that reason, the program leaders group is now going to thematically look at different issues across the institution. So for example, in this next academic year, it's about the assessment criteria. And can we get to a place where we have collegiate criteria that speaks of us as an institution rather than criteria that gets derived from individual validation or review of courses? What is it about our curriculum delivery that we can speak of collegiately that sits across the whole thing? So it's been a really useful experience in that sense, but also that celebration of pockets of it's back to the thing I was describing about assurance flowing up. There is something happening in that course actually is a really good idea for everybody.
It's a great example, I think, of a really positive outcome. And I think strategically, going back to kind of, what you were talking about, the kind of the decision around choosing to do a review process, planning it in a very particular way, quite apart from the results of a review process itself, can have this incredible quality enhancement result for an institution or a program. And it's wonderful to hear that the program chairs are now setting off in a new direction for that enhancement of teaching and learning piece. Really fantastic. So, well, colleagues, I think we've had a really wonderful discussion around this morning, and I'm certainly going away with a few refreshed ideas, perhaps toothbrushed ideas from our discussion and from our three presenters this morning. Can I ask if there are any final questions from anyone or any final observations or comments anybody would like to make at this time before we close? Valerie, go ahead.
I have two, whether we could repeat this one more time, because I see there's like a lot of topics we all struggle with or we all have approaches. So it would be really interesting to, or maybe have some place where we can just interact about it. And my second question was for Janneke. How do you deal with the fact that there's always a bit of a delay from outcomes? We get student feedback, but for instance, when we make changes in the program, we're already like a year and a half, 2 years later. So I find it always difficult to to see exactly what we are doing, because a lot of the things are invisible to students and it's very difficult to explain it to them, and then they understand it, but then I would always have to explain it to every new group. So how do you deal with that? Which things do you put on the checklists on the toilet doors, for instance?
Thank you, Valerie. And I can speak to the future webinar plans of MusiQuE after this, but Janneke, perhaps you might speak to that second question first.
Yes, well, what you just said is, of course, very recognizable. It's always a problem. You get the results of a survey, and then you want to communicate about the enhancement that you are making, and then the other survey is coming already, and the students are saying, "Oh, well, we did give you our feedback, so do we have to do it again?" So this is a challenge. Let's say it's a challenge, and I think that one of the things that helps us a lot is to have those student panels, because we repeat those panels periodically. So it's a discussion with the head of the department and the students in the department that want to participate. And there's always someone from quality culture there as well. And that helps to have some continuity in the discussion about quality and also in the discussion about enhancement. Because there you can explain, as we just did some months ago, and when we were confronted with a new national student survey, and we were still implementing improvements from the last one, there we can explain what we are doing, what they can already sense from those enhancements, what not yet, and prepare them for the fact that there is another survey coming, but that doesn't mean that we are not working on it. So student panels are a very effective way for small institutions like mine to have that ongoing discussion and to make that clear to students. And you can do, of course, you can do the same with teachers. We are now starting teacher panels as well to have the same sort of discussions. Yeah. It is a lot of work, but I have to say that it's worth it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Janneke. And I think that ongoing quality enhancement piece is possibly the biggest win out of all of this, so that our institutions and our colleagues who are not quite as close to the actual process of or the offices of quality assurance and enhancement recognize that it's not just something that happens once every 5 years, or once every 3 years, but in fact, every single week, I'm reminded of the difference. I'm a pianist originally, and I'm reminded of the difference when I started asking my students who had their smartphones to record their practicing or their piece each day in between the lessons once every 7 days. And that sort of constant feedback, which is quite a different sense rather than once every 7 days, and they're kind of the light bulb that went off in their heads. And it's somewhat similar, I think, to this the ongoing conversation about quality. It's interesting to think about the different engagement pieces, whether it's the back of the door in the toilets, or the panels, or perhaps quality issues to do with quality enhancement being a standing item on meetings, program committee meetings, school meetings, this kind of thing. Those things that can be really good, and there's many different creative ways to engage, I think, to keep the conversation alive. So I think we will take one final question from Natasha before we close. Natasha, come ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the stimulating presentations. I just want to make a short comment. Because we had our external evaluations a couple of months ago, and I have to admit that the music seminar training that I had in Belgium 2 months ago was really helpful. 4 months ago, really helpful in guiding the presentation, preparing the presentation, and be ready for questions. And I also have to agree with what the colleagues have said about ownership. And I realized through this process that we need to give voice constantly, both to our students, but also to our part-timers, because they only come a couple of times, and sometimes we forget to involve them in the processes, and they can have very good ideas on how to improve our program, our practices, our events.
Yeah,
That's all that I wanted to say. So thank you so much for today.
Of course, I think I'm very glad to hear that the training was so helpful in terms of this, and I think that particularly the point about the part-timers is so important. Sometimes, and we all have individuals who come in and teach in our conservatory, sometimes only on one day for a few hours and then disappear, and their lives are mostly elsewhere. And we can, I think, if we can find opportunities to make sure their voices are heard, then that culture piece of our institutions only improves. So very, very good point to make, Natasha. Thank you for that. Colleagues, it is 12 in some places and 11 here in Dublin. I would just like to say thank you to you all for attending today, and particularly thank you to our 3 speakers who have prompted a lot of ideas this morning, and we really appreciate the different perspectives and the sense of being able to look and hear what is happening elsewhere. This is one of the great valuable things about being able to share best practice, but it has stimulated a lot of thought, which I think will continue after our webinar this morning. I do want to thank the MusiQuE board and the office for their support of these webinars. This was actually the 3rd in the first series of MusiQuE webinars, and the materials and the recordings from the first 2 are already on the MusiQuE website, and the materials and the recording of this will also be on the website shortly, so that if you have colleagues who are interested, they can certainly see this. And to a point that was raised earlier, we certainly, because of the positive reception for these kinds of webinars and conversations, more webinars will be organized by MusiQuE in the near future. So I think what is exciting is this community of practice around what we are all doing, and that sharing of best practice across our sector. So we will definitely be back with more information about these. There will be a feedback questionnaire that is sent to you all by email, just so that you can share your opinion on today's webinar. So please do let us know both, what you feel about today's webinar and perhaps ideas for improvement. Always interested in quality enhancement. And then if there are particular topics, for example, that might be of interest for future webinars that we might run, we would love to hear those. So thank you to you all. Thank you, Oliver, Janneke, and Brian, and I wish you a wonderful afternoon and a good rest of the week. Good morning.